Hello everyone, welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for everyone who's been waiting for me and everyone joining us. Now, welcome to all of my members, subscribers and viewers from everywhere, and thank you so much for greeting. Welcome everyone. Let's give ourselves a minute to make sure we're up and running. And it looks like we are live. I hope everyone can hear me well. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. And welcome to another live stream. I want to talk to you about this in this live stream. This man. Right. This man, okay, he's speaking in Hebrew, all right? It still hasn't been published in... on YouTube, at least. It's been published, circulating, it's going viral in Israeli media, and some people are reporting it on the Israeli newspapers, Ma'ariv and Ynet and all sorts, about a reservist literally recording himself, sending a threat, and saying very important stuff. And I'm going to tell you the highlights of what he said. He's basically sending a message and a threat to Yoav Gallant. I'm going to go through the reading, but let me give you a brief beforehand, before I go into all of the details. He recorded himself, and it looks like it's somewhere in Gaza. Now, it's uncommon, and I'm going to give you a bit of a background as to what's happening, what the vibe is in the Israeli army before and after the 7th of October. He recorded himself sending a warning that him and 100,000 Israeli reservists are not leaving Gaza and will not hand Gaza to Hamas or Fatah or any Arab forces. He is aligning himself with Benjamin Netanyahu. The people who he's threatening are Yoav Gallant and Herzi Halevi, the defense minister and the head of the IDF. Let me give you a bit more details. In Ma'ariv, they reported a masked reservist armed with combat vest appears in an edited video that was apparently filmed in Gaza. According to an estimate, in a building where the IDF operated and conducted combat, in accordance with the signs of destruction of the building walls, etc. In the video addressed to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the soldier declares that he and his comrades, 100,000 reserve soldiers, will not give the keys to Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, Hamas or Fatah, or any Arab entity. The threat to Yoav Gallant was as follows. Okay, because he mentioned Yoav Gallant, he mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu, and he mentioned Herzi Halevi. And I will elaborate on all of this after I give you the details and the responses and my observation. You cannot be defense minister. That's a direct threat to the defense minister. You cannot be defense minister. Yoav Gallant, you cannot be the defense minister. This is like a form of rebellion you're talking about. And it was coming. It was coming. Everyone saw it coming. Everyone was observing, closely. I spoke about this many times. Threats like that were coming. He threatened him and the chief of staff in an aggressive monologue that they will carry out a rebellion. He said, quote, "You cannot win the war, you can't command us. And I am informing you, if we do not go to a victory, 100,000 reservists will remain on the fence. We will not move from the fence. We will call the residents of the Israeli state to come to Gaza under the security of our army." Of our army. As if there's another army. And I'll talk about that in a sec. We spoke previously about the Yoav Gallant army and the Benjamin Netanyahu army. We will listen to one leader. It's not the defense minister. It's not the chief of staff. It's only the prime minister. There's a link with Netanyahu, and it stinks. And it stinks because of the response of Benjamin Netanyahu as well that I'm going to get to in a sec. He also said, think about who you plan to give the keys to. We want victory. Our brothers were not murdered for nothing. We were not all of the nonsense. And he then stated to Gallant as well, I am informing you, Mr. Gallant, either you change your record or we change the record and realize that we want to win, or we will only go with the Prime Minister. Only whoever decides we need to win will be followed by. We will follow him. So Netanyahu was talking about this victory, an absolute victory. Here I tell you, you wanted a military coup. Listen to the words, the terminology. And this is unprecedented. Here I tell you, you wanted a military coup. We are the reservists who cannot return home. We will show you what a decision is, what a victory is. We will show you how brave Jews win, according to him. Okay? Unprecedented, blatant coup attempt. Unprecedented, blatant threat with a coup that is very implementable. Okay? The interesting thing, there are a couple of interesting things. The soldiers' words were filmed with the graffiti of the Kahana movement. Kahana movement. Kahana is one of the furthest extreme far-right movements in Israel. And let me elaborate, and then I'll go on all of the details. Okay, the IDF responded. Shortly after the publication, the IDF responded. They decided that they had to respond. They said the behavior documented in the video is a serious violation of IDF orders and IDF values and constitutes a suspicion of criminal offenses. In regard to the incident, the chief military prosecutor ordered the opening of an investigation by the investigating military police. At the same time as the investigation, in view of the seriousness of the incident, the chief of staff ordered an immediate command dialogue at all levels. So there's a top level meeting in the army, most likely will include some of the political class. That's if Netanyahu agrees. And they want to discuss what's going to happen after this. Listen to the response of Benjamin Netanyahu, okay? And this will highlight where things are going, okay? You can tell a lot by what Benjamin Netanyahu said. The Prime Minister has warned many times about the dangers of the phenomenon of refusal and permissive attitude towards it. The Prime Minister is consistent in his position. He rejects outright any manifestation of refusal from any side and expects all systems to treat them equally. Refusal is usually when you refuse to serve. This man isn't a person who refuses to serve. This man is a serving member of the army. So why are you not mentioning him? He doesn't want to mention him. Why? Because he agrees with what he says. As a matter of fact, his son, Yair Netanyahu, he posted a clip of the video on his X account from Miami, running away from serving and posting the video of this man. He had to delete it later on after he had pressure on him. Okay. What does that mean? Benjamin Netanyahu is siding with them. Okay. We have criticism for Benjamin Netanyahu's response, particularly from Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz, who is a member of the war cabinet. Benny Gantz said that he needs to have a more direct response without any twisting of the words, and particularly calls the Prime Minister to condemn sharply and not to hide behind a laundromat of words. That's Benny Gantz. He said that to Benjamin Netanyahu. Clearly, he's seeing where things are going. Now, let me give you a bit of a background so that people know what's happening. Okay. And I'll get to the present moment. Just be patient with me because it needs to be, you need to go back previously before the war so you understand where the situation is. In case you obviously haven't watched, because I spoke about parts of these things before. Before the 7th of October, you had the judicial reform protests in Israel. 1 year before, the Israeli society was split like never before. Israel has seen like 7 elections in the course of a very short time. 6 elections in 7 years. Excuse me, approximately, up until we had this government. Then, obviously, he aligned himself with the most extreme right in Israel. And they wanted to have a judicial reform where they can have the ultimate authority on the judicial system in Israel. Many people criticized, including the US, by the way, in some countries. But it had criticism from within Israel because to many people in Israel, it compromised the democracy of Israel, the Jewish democracy of Israel as they perceive it. And we all know what they mean when they say about the Jewish democracy, the fact that they're using it as front, but we're saying what they say. They want a Jewish democracy. They don't want to have Jewish supremacy on Jewish supremacy. The Jewish supremacy, according to them, must be reserved to the Palestinians. Okay. People started to protest. And during these protests, you had movements. One of them is called Brothers in Arms, people who are from the army who protest against Benjamin Netanyahu and the judicial reform. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Netanyahu received a letter in August 2023 from 1,000 Israeli pilots that we will not serve in an army under dictatorship. And there were already calls to refuse. Many people were fleeing Israel. You had groups online on social media called Migrating Together, where Israelis talk to each other, which countries are good, financial opportunities, we don't want to live here anymore, etc. That was obviously accelerated times 1,000 after the 7th of October, and Israel is trying to censor it as much as possible. We're talking about over 3 million Israelis who already fled the country. Okay. So you've had that before. Then the 7th of October came with all of the questions surrounding the 7th of October. We already elaborated the complicity when it comes to Israel, the fact that Israel committed the massacres against the Israelis, that Hamas focused on the military, and all of the statements that came from the pilots that they were ordered to shoot their own people. Going back to Gaza, Israel killed approximately 100 of the Israeli soldiers held in Gaza by now, deliberately under the Hannibal Directive, so they don't have any implications when it comes to Hamas. And the hints and the prior knowledge that something was about to happen that Israelis ignored. Now, there is a belief, an estimation that Benjamin Netanyahu and some people in Israel knew that something was about to happen, not to the extent that it revealed itself in. However, they knew something was going to happen, but they decided to avoid it. Why? So that they could unite the Israeli people under the external enemy. This is typically what countries do when you want corruption to thrive in the country. You unite yourself against another enemy. And enemy Hamas. Who likes Hamas in Israel? Okay. Very few people. Anyway, let's unite the nation. We'll go on a war. It didn't work. And it became evident from day one. Netanyahu already had criticism from day one, before the ground invasion. Many people didn't want to invade Gaza. The Israelis don't want to fight. When he visited the Gaza borders, soldiers were swearing at him. Many of them refused to see him in hospitals. They hate the living daylight out of him. Okay. They went in. Thousands fled in the initial days of the war. 2,000 Israeli soldiers fled with 2 commanders. That's just what was revealed in the media, by the way. Then you had many people refusing to serve. Many people fled the country, obviously, including his son. And then you had the tensions about the view and management of the war, particularly between the defense minister and the chief of staff on one side and Benjamin Netanyahu on the other side. But it was very, very evident from the defense minister and Benjamin Netanyahu. And the tensions between them were there from before, by the way, because he sacked him once, a few months before, because he was showing more sympathy with the protesters, although he is a member of the Likud party. And he was also upset with the fact that Netanyahu handed security positions to Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, including the introduction. He created this new national security ministry for Ben-Gvir, and because Smotrich wanted to be a defense minister, but he already agreed he'll give it to Yoav Gallant, he gave Smotrich a position of a minister in the Ministry of Defense in Israel. So you had all of that. During the war, it started to become evident that these people don't see eye to eye. The first month, you had the same poison in their statements, and everything was evident. We want to destroy them, every living thing. You saw the statement, they're human animals, da, 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 da. As time went by and they realized that they cannot win, they started to have more tensions and friction between them, which led to the withdrawal of Division 36, including all of the Golani Brigade. Okay, what does that have to do with Netanyahu? It has to do with the fact that the Golani Brigade and Division 36 consists of mainstream Israelis that represent the majority of the population in Israel. It's the oldest division in Israel. Golani is the oldest brigade. And they went to Lebanon. That's supposedly managed by Gallant. And from that point, I was talking about the fact that you're kind of having two armies in Israel, one of them under Gallant and one of them under Netanyahu. Why as well? They obviously had lots of meetings together. That didn't work. They broke the meetings. They canceled them. Netanyahu didn't attend. He refused to attend. He was checking people in, security checking the chief of staff to make sure he doesn't have spy devices to release anything. And that was published in the Israeli media. And it reached a level where the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, he went to Netanyahu's office at one point, and he threatened to bring a Golani brigade with him next time to implement law and order in Netanyahu's office, in the prime minister's office. Okay. And many meetings, obviously they had fighting, several meetings, fighting inside the meeting, swear words almost hitting, and they had to cancel them, and they didn't reach a conclusion. Particularly from Netanyahu's camp / Ben-Gvir Smotrich, and on the opposite side, the military establishment and the intelligence establishment. The defense minister, the IDF chief, head of the Mossad, head of the Shabak. Okay. So you had these things brewing to what's happening now, to the video that I showed you a snippet of and obviously discussed. When they withdrew Division 36 and Golani from Khan Yunis and from the fighting from the battlefield in Gaza, they didn't succeed. They haven't accomplished anything, and that's evident from now. Today, the Palestinian resistance, just the Qassam brigades, they released that they took down 12 Israeli vehicles, 9 of which tanks. 9 today. The numbers are growing day by day, and obviously, not many people are talking about that. And in Lebanon, you had 11 attacks today. Okay. You withdrew the most capable division in the army. Who did you replace it with? The other division that consists of Kfir, that has Netzach Yehuda, the eternity of Judea, and these radical brigades that are based in the West Bank and that are relatively new without significant urban warfare experience. These people are used to bullying civilians and shooting people for fun and killing little girls and boys walking down the streets. This is what they're used to, settlers. They formed, some of them, in particular Netzach Yehuda, that the United States claimed they're imposing sanctions on, by the way, to try and attract the Orthodox community. However, they ended up attracting the religious Zionists, how they call them, from the West Bank, from the occupied territories of the West Bank and the settlements. And by the way, these are not to be confused with some of the religious Israelis, by the way, because there are Israelis who are religious who might look similar to the settlers and who are not settlers, by the way. But they have a distinct look with this and the hat, and what have you, but more casual clothes. And all right, they're in Gaza. They are in Gaza. So this highlights very well, very clearly, that the division fighting in Gaza is more loyal to Benjamin Netanyahu, and the division fighting in Lebanon is more loyal to Yoav Gallant. Now, not all of them intended it to be this way, but it turned out this way because of the progress of the war. This could have been avoided. This could have been avoided previously. You obviously had tensions in the IDF previously, like Golani and Netzach Yehuda, the Eternity of Judea. They had fights previously in the West Bank, by the way, that were later on solved and diffused by commanders coming in. And they were with regards to controlling a certain base. And that was recorded several years back in Israel. And that led to this moment. So what do we have this moment? You have this division in Gaza, including all of the radical brigades from the West Bank. And this man who posted this video is most likely one of them. Most likely one of them. So when it comes to Netanyahu, we know that many Israelis are against him. We know that many people in the Israeli army are against him, but he has teeth and he has claws in the Israeli society, in Israeli politics, and in the army. This is coming when? This is coming simultaneously with the increasing levels of protests in Israel to agree on a deal. Hamas already said, I posted a video earlier on, you can watch it later on, we're not negotiating now, we don't trust Israel, and we have no faith that the US will bind Israel to accept a deal because we don't trust the Israelis, and why should we talk if they're not willing to come to our core demands, which are withdrawal from Gaza, ending the genocide, allowing all aid in, allowing everyone back freely to every place they want to be in, and rebuilding Gaza. Netanyahu, and I would not be surprised if, I have no evidence of that, but from my observation, Netanyahu could potentially be behind this because his response to it signals that he's happy with what's happening. He has no problem with what's happening. The question is, where will this lead to? Where will this lead to? Okay. This could be an attempt from Benjamin Netanyahu, if he was the one behind it, to threaten the military chief of staff and the defense minister not to try and do something behind his back, because there were attempts to do something behind his back. Like when Benny Gantz started to visit the US and he wasn't supported by the Israeli embassy over there, despite the fact that he's in the war cabinet. Like when Blinken came to Israel and he tried to meet individually, four eyes with Herzi Halevi, which was unprecedented, that later Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich criticized, and they refused to allow him, saying that you're a political level, he's a military level, we need a representative if you want to meet him. And they then they haven't allowed him to go and visit Karm Abu Salem. So you have clear movements. Okay, if Benjamin Netanyahu is behind this, he could potentially boost his position when it comes to extending the war, okay? Because so far he succeeded in extending the war for 8 months. No one imagined it would be this long, okay? There were claims that we're going to go through a long campaign, whatever, but Israel as a country, it cannot sustain long wars. It's not built like that. Israel is built on short, straight, direct hits in the enemy territory, get it over and done with, mostly through the Air Force or a special operation unit, get the hell out and finish the job. It's a small country. Most of the reservists work in the tech industry, finance industry, and when they're not engaged in these industries, you have economic collapse. They were already degraded by Moody's with a negative projection, which is worse than the degrading, by the way. And they are expected to be degraded even further. And Israel cannot sustain that. You had 8 months in, you're not Russia, right? Been having 2 years of war with Ukraine. The ruble is up and their production is fine and they're getting support and no problem. With Israel, you cannot sustain it for a very long time. Okay, so that's the first option. If Netanyahu is behind it, he can potentially give himself a bit more time to prolong this war. If Netanyahu is not behind it and he just witnessed that happening, and there is this notion from the army, by the way, because the Israeli troops in Gaza used to have graffiti on the walls in Gaza to send political messages that were investigated by the army. Now, we all know what the Israeli army is, whichever brigade or division it is, we know that. However, that doesn't mean they don't have differences and divisions between them, severe divisions and differences. They had graffiti messages, political messages in Gaza that Israel investigated to a very small degree. Now they're calling for a proper investigation, and Herzi Halevi is calling for an official meeting. This shows that this is very, very serious. Okay, if Netanyahu was not behind this, and the reason I said that, by the way, is to show you that that's an option for someone to say that without it being coordinated, although I suspect that it's not coordinated because it serves Netanyahu. You're talking about an extremely dangerous position. Extremely dangerous position. Why? Because although some people would be happy in the army to get it over and done with and just go back to their lives, some people would see, okay, we died for no reason then. So we came here, we're going to go out, Hamas is going to come back. Why? They have evidence to support that. You fought in Jabalia, in Khan Yunis, you withdrew. When you came back through Rafah and then the center camps, you faced harsher resistance. So what did you see? A stronger Hamas when you left. So to them, if I leave, that means defeat. And that is the actual definition of defeat. Not meeting your military objectives. What's the military objective? Not harming Hamas or beating them or destroying, demolishing the Hamas. That was the first one. Before the prisoners, by the way, remember, or the early days in the war, Netanyahu was criticized in Israel because of that. He used to say the first thing is to demolish the Hamas. Then take back whoever we can from the Israelis. He used to say that. Take back whoever we can, as much as we can, from the Israelis who were kidnapped, thinking that they might use that as leverage against the Palestinian resistance. Clearly they haven't, because they're still facing resistance. They're getting bodies back at the expense of at least 10 times the number of dead Israeli soldiers conducting the operation to try and rescue these people. And they're getting dead people anyway and killing their own people. It doesn't make any sense. And many Israelis see it this way, that it doesn't make sense. And that's why they want the war to end. You would be faced, and again, because I talk a lot and go into lots of details. So if this is a genuine move from someone within the army, and this man is truly representing this amount of people, you're talking about potentially a riskier scenario. The two scenarios are risky. It's already bad, by the way. What's happened is already devastating. Because you need to understand, before the judicial reform and before the 7th of October, the military establishment in Israel was a holy establishment. You cannot touch it. There is no touching the military establishment. But now you have people in the government who did not serve in the army and who used to swear at the army, like Ben Gvir, because sometimes they didn't allow them to do everything they wanted in the West Bank. In the other meeting the other day, Gadi Eisenkot, who actually had two of his family, his son and his nephew died in Gaza. At least, he sent his family members to fight. They were killed in a booby trap tunnel. He told him, you don't talk because you, what's it called? You runner, as if he runs away from the army. Okay, he called him mishtamet in Hebrew. Don't talk, you did not serve. Okay, you refused to serve. You're not allowed to come and talk about the army. But Netanyahu gave him a national minister of national security position. Why it could be worse if it's not backed by Netanyahu? It could be worse if it's not backed and orchestrated by Benjamin Netanyahu, because even if Benjamin Netanyahu goes and has a deal with Hamas, goes and reaches a deal, you're talking of people who are armed and equipped, and they don't want to listen. And that's possible. Why? Because you already planted the roots of refusal, of disobedience in the army, which is very bad, obviously, in any army. You can't just refuse. You're a number in the army. That's it. You're ordered to do what you do. That's it. Refuse, punishment. Okay. Why? Because even if 80% of the army, let's say 80%, okay? Because if we're basing it on the number itself, you're talking about 100,000 reservists. Israel in total, I mean, all of them functional. The Israeli army has been hit very badly, approximately 500,000. But let's say 80% of the army decides to leave, and you have 20% who are refusing, who are armed and who are audacious enough to release a threatening video to everyone in Israel and the chief of staff. What's preventing them from going ahead with what they believe in? They're armed. They have people who will supply for them. They have tanks. They have troop carriers. What are you going to do? Fight with them? That's it. Israel ended. If you're talking about that, then that's it. Then everyone who was waiting for this moment will just sit down and look and have popcorn. Look, here we go. It started. Now, many people from the resistance and from outside of the resistance have been seeing this coming. Hamas conducted the 7th of October operation because they were reading what was happening in Israel. And many people in Israel were threatening, were warning, were sending warning signs, especially in the intelligence establishment. They were warning the Israeli leadership that our enemies are seeing what's happening. They're smelling weakness. One of them was, what was his name? I quoted him the other day. I forgot the name. A bald guy, old. I think he was in the Shabak, or he was a major general. Anyway, he was the one who actually predicted that the 7th of October is about to happen, just over a year ago. He said, our enemies are preparing for something big, and be very careful. I mean, it didn't take a lot to predict that it was going to happen, because Hamas had a drama series 1.5 years ago showing them invading Israel. Okay, that would be bad if they refuse. Why? Because how are you going to take them out? By military force? That's it. That means military versus military. That means you created a new militia. You're admitting that there's a massive chunk of the Israeli army that is an illegal militia, because they want to continue to fight for the greater Israel and for these fascist visions. Not that the regular Israel is not fascist, but hey, there's levels. Will they listen to Netanyahu? That's not guaranteed. Why? Because when you plant the seeds of rebellion, it's very far-reaching. And Netanyahu made a mistake by doing that. He planted seeds for rebellion with the judicial reform, with what he's doing now. Because if you've planted the seeds of rebellion and you gave these people who are armed the option to say no and refuse, they felt a sense of power. So when they feel a sense of power, they can implement that on you. What's preventing them from implementing it on Benjamin Netanyahu? Because Benjamin Netanyahu is capable of making a deal with Hamas. In Israel, they blame him. In Israel, people blame Benjamin Netanyahu for funding the Nukhba force that carried out the 7th of October. The Nukhba as in the elite force from the Al-Qassam brigades that conducted the 7th of October. They say you funded them. And that's true, because he passed hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas. And he spoke about how it's important to have a strong Hamas in Gaza in face of Fatah, thinking, divide and rule, thinking that it's going to work with Hamas. Ignoring the fact that Hamas operate based on principles, based on faith and principles. And to them, they wouldn't mind being eliminated in the process, by the way. Hamas don't mind being completely destroyed and have and it's evident to work for their cause. You need to understand this mentality, by the way. So it's a very, very dangerous move, an unprecedented move. And I don't think that this will be finished there. There's going to be a lot more to be spoken about when it comes to Israel. The reports are coming bit by bit. Obviously, in the beginning, you had the Benjamin Netanyahu statement, then you had Benny Gantz statement. We will have more statements. And by the way, the people on the streets in Israel will sense what's happening. That will reflect in their protests as well. And you may see a counter move. If the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, previously said, I'll bring a Golani brigade, he technically started it. And now you have this person, although there is no confirmed link with him, with Benjamin Netanyahu, although what we established from Netanyahu's response is that he actually likes this. What's preventing the ones who are aligned with Yoav Gallant and Herzi Halevi to come up with another statement? The next statement, the Division 36 in Lebanon, the new statement. What are they going to say? And obviously, I'll keep monitoring that to provide you with more updates. But this was the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about. I hope I elaborated enough to give you a bigger picture. Let me open up the space for you, see if you have any questions. And again, thank you so much for everyone joining in. And thank you. Firstly, Troy Healed, welcome to Supporter. Thank you very much for your membership. Your name, thank you very much for your super thanks. You said thank you, Mahmoud from the Netherlands. You're welcome, my pleasure, and thank you for the super thanks. Free Palestine is saying thank you for the super thanks, and you're saying Assalamu alaikum, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And Maryam Al-Hasni, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Thank you very much for your super thanks. Let me head out to the questions. I hope I can reach the beginning of this because YouTube is a little bit complicated to reach the initial messages for some reason. A little bit complicated. I'm hearing myself now, excuse me. Let's open the live from both places so I can see if I can reach previous messages as well. And Jessica Lengiel, thank you so much for your super thanks as well. Amir D. Wood is saying, breaking, Abu Ubaidah said a moment ago that his speech that he captured IOF soldiers in battle. I was about to monitor Abu Ubaidah, by the way. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. But me and Abu Ubaidah were having a speech at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, simultaneously. But no, I think Abu Ubaidah's speech was recorded. Okay. Let me have a look. Maybe we can talk about that too, Abu Ubaidah's speech. If they... Listen, if they kidnapped more soldiers, oh my God, yes. All right, okay. Abu Ubaidah indeed. Okay, but wait for the Israeli streets to explode now. He did. Al-Qassam brigades just kidnapped more Israeli soldiers in Jabalia. There we go. I think Israel's going to explode now because the Israeli protesters are going to be viewing everything, by the way. Our Mujahideen carried out a complicated operation on Saturday afternoon, northern Gaza, where they dragged a Zionist force to one of the tunnels in Jabalia. This is what he said. We killed and wounded and imprisoned some of them. He confirmed some of them were killed, some of them wounded, some of them were imprisoned. The enemy government continues in its blind, pointless policy in revenge and destruction. The enemy's government is moving from one failure to another. And the enemy's army markets the release of the Israeli bodies as if it's a military achievement or a moral achievement, and we just spoke about that. It's quite stupid, actually, them thinking that it's some sort of accomplishment. And our fighters are continuing in teaching the occupation lessons across all of the fighting fronts. And the recent failures that they had were in Jabalia and Rafah. The occupation forces are digging to look for bodies of prisoners for Netanyahu's personal gains. Our fighters carried out dozens of operations against their forces, the Israeli forces, in the past 2 weeks in Rafah and Beit Hanun. Wow. Wow, this is going to resonate heavily in Israel. You're going to see a big response in Israel. Because listen, the Israeli protesters, by the way, they're listening to Abu Ubaidah live now. They're hearing what Abu Ubaidah says more than Netanyahu in Israel. And AK, thank you for your super. And Gullyberg, thank you very much for your super. Thanks. Gullyberg is saying Mahmoud is Netanyahu approaching the same fate as Gaddafi and Mussolini had. Look, he's dragging the Israelis there. He's building the foundations of, a civil war in Israel. He already supported things that no previous Israeli prime minister supported. You see, the things that have been happening in the past 8 months are unprecedented on many levels, like particularly the friction between Israel and the United States, by the way. They had frictions before. Obama had frictions with Netanyahu. People in Israel used to put posters on for Barack Obama with a Palestinian kufi, right, and call him a terrorist. But it wasn't to this level. And obviously, Barack Obama had a delay in one of the fighter jet shipment up until the last year where he was in office. And he spoke about his feuds with Netanyahu in his biographies that he released later on. But now, not taking advice, being rude to the US administration, having very blunt statements, having your closest allies, linking the US to Hamas, dissing the president of the United States. Now, all of that is valid criticism, obviously, but you're talking about Israel. Israel, to them, their lifeline is the United States. Without no United States, there is no Israel. You know, the British government established them. The US took over as the world's new superpower after World War II. And Israel became their little puppet state, their aircraft carrier in the Middle East. How can you talk to the US president like that when he is the one running the country that supports you in your toughest moments? So supports you as a genocidal state, support you against the UN resolutions, vetoes, half of US vetoes in the Security Council were for the sake of Israel. So he's pushing there. He's pushing for something really bad. And look, we're saying he's pushing for something really bad. What's really bad is already in front of our eyes. Firstly, Israel carrying out this genocide, opening up all of its dark history and existence to the world. You don't want that. Israel operates in the dark. Israel thrives in the dark. You shouldn't be visible. You shouldn't draw attention. They operate in the dark, and they operate well in the dark because they manipulate, they push their propaganda, they pay people, everything's on the low. The media is still serving them to this day, 8 months in. They don't call it a genocide. And they still buy the false 7th of October narrative. And everything is exposed to everyone. And they're not just talking about now. So people are not just interested about now anymore. People already dug. You gave the whole world 8 months to dig up your dark history. And they started on an individual, in an individual manner, each one to their own, realizing that what they were sold was a pseudo-narrative. It wasn't the truth. It wasn't the real history. It was a fabricated history. So, and that's very, very damaging for Israel. Israel considers at least the public opinion in the US to be an existential threat. Like they look at the polls in the US and the level of support for the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian cause. To them, it's devastating. So they can't handle it. Abu Tahir is saying, I have a question. U.S. soldiers signed to the Gaza PA resistance force fight with U.S. soldiers. Is it true? Well, we had a report that U.S. troops who were assigned to provide aid to Gaza, and thank you for that question, by the way, it's important, that they were injured during the delivery of this aid. The US didn't say anything further. They did not elaborate much. But that could prove that you had an attack from the resistance against US forces if they were attempting to set foot on ground, because Hamas told them previously no force is welcome on Gaza unless it's welcomed by the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance. So even if a US soldier steps on the sand of Gaza or in Gazan territory, right, and that's not related to the aid, or the Palestinian resistance translates it as such, they will attack them. And why will they attack them? To send a message. To send a message to the US, to send a message to Israel, and to anyone else who thinks that they can come to Gaza without the approval of the Palestinian people of Gaza. And that's how it should be. No one should be allowed to enter a sovereign place unless it's authorized. You're bringing forces. Talk about Israel the day after, talking about Gaza, people under occupation. You talk about the day after apartheid, violent, racist Zionism, supremacy. Talk about the day after that. The day after 76 years of ethnic cleansing and occupation. Talk about that. The day where we'll have equality between the Jordan River to the sea. Say that. Talking about Gaza. The people who suffered most from Israel. Why is Gaza the fiercest resistance? Did anyone ask that? It's because they suffered most. It's because 72% of them before this genocide were refugees. Now all of them are internal refugees. 90% are internally displaced now. And you're talking about them? People starving to death, imprisoned. Everyone under the age of 18 didn't see anything but Gaza because of the blockade. Before the genocide, living in homes that are hazardous to their health. Now nowhere to live apart from a tent that's being bombed. No healthcare, no nothing. People dying left, right, and center because they can't be treated. People with injuries now die in Gaza because they're not treated and they're not fed. There's no recovery. It's and they talk about Gaza. Ray Lin Man is saying, you got any military news today? Also, which countries are in the Middle East have abandoned the dollar? Yes, I mean, from the military, from the resistance side, obviously from the Israeli side, they're committing massacres. You see what they're doing. They're still massacring people. The death toll is rising day by day. From the resistance side, they carried out, Al-Qassam only, they carried out several attacks. Altogether, they took down 13 Israeli vehicles, 12 to 13 Israeli vehicles. 2 of them are D9 bulldozers, and approximately 10 Merkava tanks, either wholly or partially destroyed. And when you're talking about that, I mean, okay, D9, 1, Merkava, 4, usually. You're talking about 40, 50 people, either dead or wounded. And Israel isn't saying that anyone was killed today. Hezbollah had 11 attacks today on multiple bases that they usually attack within the territory across the Lebanese borders with Israel. And it's not going anywhere. And what the last 2 weeks proved is that the resistance is stronger than before. The resistance is stronger than before. Firstly, what does that say? They haven't been hit hard, at least from the beginning. They have very, very good production. They have a strong lifeline. And they have enough capacity. They have enough people, more than enough people. Because Lord knows, Israel recruited more people for Hamas, by the way. Didn't they? Israel just recruited all of the world against them by committing this genocide. Everyone across the world saying, oh, okay, cool, fine, I get why Hamas is doing it. Let alone the people of Gaza. I mean, if you killed a few people from Hamas, then they recruited tenfold the next day. And they will give them a training on the job. Although I don't think so, because the people who are attacking Israel, by the way, and I don't think their people, their forces, took a big hit, because the people who are attacking, from what the resistance is publishing, are extremely experienced people. Yasin 105 targeting it, blowing it immediately, whether it's 1 or 200 meters or 300 meters away. Precision. That's not a guided it's RPG. You need to aim well. You're talking about people who are very, very well trained. So, what are you doing with them? Nothing. And you have more people in Israel, obviously, saying we don't want to send our children and what have you. See, if anyone posted before, would you mind posting again? Because I can't reach the earlier messages, by the way. YouTube needs to fix this. Kate is saying, as we know, Israelis love to create stories, dramas, play victims. Do you think this is a coup? Is just another fake story, the timing of it all after the ICJ ruling? Look, I think this is not very connected to that because it doesn't really benefit them. So it's not like they're going to gain sympathy from anyone by the fact that there's a military coup happening or in the making. If they wanted to get sympathy, they'd do something positive once in their life. They're not. And now everyone is seeing what they're doing. So I really don't think that they're linked. I don't think they're trying to get any sympathy by that. This is just damaging Israel's image in general. And it's exceptionally harmful internally for Israel. So even if there was a cost of gaining some sort of sympathy, the damage that this is causing internally, by the way, and clearly Netanyahu has lost it completely. If he's behind this, Benjamin Netanyahu lost it completely, or at least if he's not behind it. So I suspect he's behind it because of his response. He should have made a much more harsh statement. If there is rebellion in the army, you have an unequivocal condemnation. It's unacceptable. You need to respect the chain of command, etc. He didn't do that. He gave him a backing. Give him a backing win. Francis Fitzgerald, thank you so much for your super thanks. You said Gaza has Hamas who fights for the people in the West Bank. Well, there's Hamas in the West Bank, but in a much more limited number and much more limited capabilities. But you have other resistance movements, like the PIJ is active, some of the Fatah resistance is active there, and they're joined together under this united military movements that are small but are very well organized, by the way, and that are very active. Look, what Israel did in the West Bank since the 7th of October hasn't been done since Operation, the wall operation in the early 2000s. Chomat Magen, they called it, protective wall. There's so many forces in Jenin, so many forces in many parts of the West Bank, and they're treating the West Bank as the following front after Gaza. Now, what's not helping is the fact that some people in the Israeli government are annoying the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, who's on their side, who has agreements with them and security agreements with them and helps them with everything and enables them, they're even causing problems with them. Smotrich is refusing to pass funds to the Palestinian Authority. They refuse to grant workers rights permits to go and work in Israel and go back to the West Bank, because you had many of the working force in Israel and in some of the settlements, by the way, are Palestinian workers who just want to make a living. So they stopped that. They started to get Indian workforce, by the way, who are now complaining, saying that we're being used and not being paid properly and what have you. So you have that in the West Bank, but the problem is, obviously, with the West Bank is you have so much Israeli presence anyway, and you also have an authority that is bound by and is ordered by Israel. Abdullah saying that Zionists and neocons trying to cause World War III with Ukraine and Gaza. I agree to a very large extent with that. The campaign in Ukraine that has nothing to do with supporting the Ukrainian people or anything, but is only a translation of the US attempts to take over Russia, by the way, following US demands. The NATO is the US, and they're doing all of that for the sake of the US. They're not doing it for the sake of the European people, for the sake of the Ukrainian people, for the sake of the... They've been suffering economically. Russia's been thriving. The ruble is up. Ruble is sky high. They have the production militarily, they're continuing. They're getting supported by China, by Iran, by other countries too. And the West is being divided. It's being shattered to pieces. Now it's being torn because of the foreign policy when it comes to Ukraine. And another thing here, before I continue to comment on that, if you are sincere, if the United States and Britain and the NATO, if you were sincere in your support for Ukraine, because they are facing an occupier, an oppressor who is so bad, then why are you not supporting the Palestinian resistance with billions and arming them and training the Palestinian resistance in London and in Washington and in New York? Why? If you're sincere, you're not sincere. Why? Because you only care about your political and financial greed. You don't care about the people. If you were morally consistent, Hamas would have been here in London. They would have been in Washington having meetings, speaking in parliaments like Zelensky is, right? He's fighting against occupation, right? Fighting this invader to his country, occupying his territory, right? That was just formed 30 years ago, by the way. So why not support the resistance? If you're consistent in your position and you support the Ukrainians to liberate themselves from what you call, Putin and this dictatorship and tyranny, you have the Palestinian resistance. You need to switch sides in Israel. But, of course, I'm being hypothetical here. We know the situation. Their support, Zelensky supports Israel. It just shows you who the man is. Claiming that he's fighting occupation and he's supporting Israel. And he's saying Russia is like Hamas. But they are pushing for a world war. And from my observation, at least since the beginning of this war in Ukraine, and obviously what's happening in Gaza, and hearing both sides and the statements coming out from the leadership, for example, in Russia and in China, countries from the global south and eastern countries, and the statements coming out from Western leaders, it's blatant that the warmongers are sitting in London, in Washington, in Paris, in NATO capitals. These are the warmongers. Benjamin Netanyahu is begging to push for a global war, is begging to push for at least a regional war. Him doing that with the embassy, with the consulate in Syria. Why did he do that? Why? It's such a risky thing to do. He wanted this, but Biden gave him a cold shoulder immediately. Why? Because warmongering genocide Joe Biden, even him, he's not fooled by Netanyahu. And he knows that Benjamin Netanyahu has his own agenda and that he doesn't want to drag US into a regional conflict, let alone because it could escalate to a global conflict for the sake of Benjamin Netanyahu, not for the sake of Israel or the people of the region. So they are. Torotam is asking me if I stream on Rumble. I currently only stream on YouTube, and my videos are on YouTube. YouTube and Rumble was syncing at one point for some reason, and everything was automatically going there. That stopped for some reason. YouTube stopped syncing to Rumble. They probably didn't want to have to make life easier. But no, my lives are only on YouTube at the moment. Vivette, thank you so much for your super. You said, hi Mahmoud, thank you for all you do. You're welcome, thank you. Since Hamas refused to talk now, where does that leave the ceasefire talks? In the hands of Israel. And what Israel is doing now is what it has done before. Delay, 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 and make it impossible to reach an agreement and a solution. And the delegating team already said that, by the way. The delegating team, who were appointed by Benjamin Netanyahu, they said over 3 months ago that if we continue down the same path of negotiation that we're going down in at the moment, then you're looking at least 1 more year of negotiations before we potentially reach anything. They also previously stated that we're ordered to do something in the morning, and in the evening we were ordered to do something else. They were also banned from going to Qatar and going to meet other countries' mediator representatives. The head of the Mossad was banned before. The delegating team was banned before. When they were authorized, they had representatives from Benjamin Netanyahu to go and make sure that they comply with only what Benjamin Netanyahu says. They were ordered before not to reach a deal. The delegating team from Israel were ordered by, and let that sit in properly, they were ordered by Benjamin Netanyahu not to sign a deal unless it's approved by him. And what's approved by him? Nothing. They already agreed, them in principle, they accepted, not agreed and signed because Netanyahu banned them, accepted 2 deals previously. The Israelis were in the streets saying the delegating team accept the ceasefire. He didn't. They previously said, the delegating team, the Israeli delegation to Qatar and to other countries, they previously said that as soon as we have progress with the negotiations, Benjamin Netanyahu comes and puts another impossible condition. That's coming from Israel. That's coming from Israel, ladies and gentlemen, from the negotiating delegation. So you still have Netanyahu in power, and he's still appointing the negotiation delegation. Well, where are you going to go? He doesn't want to reach a solution. It's convenient for him. He also doesn't see that there is potential for him to secure his government after the war. Because if Benjamin Netanyahu, if he reaches a stage where he feels like, if I end the war today, I will protect myself tomorrow, he will stop the war. He will. But he didn't receive such guarantees, and he's not comfortable, he's not reassured about the day after him, after this war ends. That's why he's pushing for an indefinite war, an open war. And many people in Israel are criticizing him heavily for that. But he's not listening. That's Benjamin Netanyahu for you. Yet, and although you have him on the ICC now in Israel as a genocidal state and calls to the ICJ, he's welcome to the US. Supporting a war criminal. And thank you, Yvette, for that super and for that question. And Arm with Harmony, thank you. Welcome to your for the membership. Let's see, what else do we have here? Marvin Vergas. You ever speak in public? Thank you for your super thanks, Marvin, by the way. You asked me if I speak in public, you have any book coming out. Public speaking in general, I haven't done public speaking at the moment. I'm not doing public speaking, but obviously if someone is interested in public speaking, they can definitely approach me at any point. I'm mostly posting videos. And if I have any book coming out, it's only my book that I posted, which you can read for free on my website, the Manifesto for the One-State Solution. So far, I have a digital copy of that book, so you're able to read it. If you're on a desktop, you can download a PDF too. And again, thank you for your super thanks. Ulf, are people allowed nowadays to pray in Al-Aqsa? Yes. Yes, they are allowed to pray in Al-Aqsa. Obviously, you still have the normal restrictions, and sometimes they're banned from praying in certain times. And also, you always have security outside. Sometimes they will take your ID, for example, check you, question you, where are you coming from, why are you coming here, la, 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 la. But yeah, obviously, some people can pray in Al-Aqsa. However, Israel regularly, attacks them. Sometimes they completely close it down, like they did in certain instances previously. If settlers want to go in, they can have a massive restriction of movement. They had cases where they shot at people and imprisoned them inside the actual mosque without any condemnation, by the way. No, I didn't hear anyone condemning from enlightened democracies, enlightened Western democracies. It's as if, Al-Aqsa is fine, third holiest site in Islam. It's okay. Let Israel do whatever it wants. And you didn't see the images of the people handcuffed and blindfolded on the floor, or Israel using stun grenades inside the mosque, or bombs, or shooting. You don't see any of that. Attacking people while they pray. Wade Davis is asking who authorized the Nova Music Festival on the border. The IDF. Although they had warnings and it was close to Gaza, the IDF authorized it. And you know who also massacred them? The IDF, the pilots. They later released images in October of helicopters in Israel shooting at revelers in the Nova Festival without knowing who's there. They only released a small number of images, by the way. They didn't release everything. If you look at it from an aerial view, the way the cars were roasted, burning, the fire and everything, it came from an airplane. It came from Apaches. It didn't come from people on the ground. But they obviously started selling the notion that, Hamas massacred all of them. Hamas kidnapped people. They might have killed a couple of civilians who they deemed as a threat or what have you. They didn't go outright to massacre Israelis. That wasn't their intention. And there is no evidence of that. And that's why Israel wouldn't investigate. And if they even want to investigate now, they had 8 months to remove evidence and destroy evidence. And the survivors of the Nova Festival, what happened to them? 50 committed suicide. Do you know that? 50. The representative in the Israeli Knesset said that. Many of them are in forced hospitalization, according to the same person inside the Israeli Knesset, the representative. What does forced hospitalization mean? What does that mean exactly? How can you force someone to go to hospital? What, handcuff him? Inject him with something? And why is that? Does he know something that you don't want to be known? Right? How did 50 commit suicide? Trauma? Only trauma? And that's it? We go and commit suicide? All of 50? Were they poisoned to death? Lots of questions. That's why they don't want to investigate it. And they had a lot of time now to remove evidence. Had a lot of time to remove evidence. Barbara is saying Egypt warned Israel about the 7th of October as well a year ago. We had that report. I heard that report that Egypt warned Israel about the 7th of October. An Israeli female in the army warned her commanders about suspicious movements on the 6th of October. They had other warnings that was coming. What, did they ignore everything, or did they allow it to happen? Did they allow it to happen? Christie, why are the sicko IF taking Palestinian bodies? To harvest organs and steal skin, or use them as leverage. So, did you see, and that again, that's not reported on mainstream media. Did you see the bodies that were found next to Al-Shifa Hospital? 4 mass graves. Civilians and medical staff and patients of the hospital, handcuffed, blindfolded, heads removed from their bodies, missing body parts, missing organs. They were probably doing that to treat the Israeli soldiers who were missing body parts. Don't you get it? This is what happened, most likely. They'll have Israelis who are wounded. They'll kill Palestinians or whatever, take them alive, because some organs, you need the people to be alive, by the way. Take their organs, give them to the Israeli soldiers. Simple. Ash is asking question, what's the best website for the resistance videos? Well, they had their own websites that was shut down now. Okay, I used to access them from their websites. Now they release them directly to, sometimes they give an exclusive to Al Jazeera, sometimes they give an exclusive to Al Arabi. They're later released to some foreign media as well. Al Jazeera in Arabic, they take most of them, and they're later released, copied from Al Jazeera to other organizations. So if you see aljazeera.net, for example, or their Arabic version on YouTube, you will most likely see everything as and when they release them, because, like I said, they took down their websites. Better Ireland 1, Mahmoud, have you seen the old video of Bibi boasting that he can easily control and manipulate US politicians? Yes, I have seen that. And it's evident. I mean, the man goes and talks to the Congress as if he's above the US president. And, you know, people in America, some people, to say the least, in America are fine with that. They undermine democracies all across the Western world, and the populations are asleep as if they're zombies, some of them. Some people are more aware, some people as if it's not happening. You have a foreign country controlling what's happening with your politicians. What the hell is wrong with you? What on actual earth is wrong with you? And the majority of the people protesting in the streets, your people, and you're not listening to them. Why are you listening to a foreign entity when it comes to matters of national security and foreign policy? Is it because you're aligned with them? Is it because you're the same clique? Is it because you're the same genocide cartel in power, those in power? AIPAC in the US, other Zionist lobbies across the world. Here you just had a revelation in Britain from Declassified just a few days ago, £480,000 spent on a third of UK conservatives from Israeli lobbies. That's just what's been found out, right? We're not talking about the bigger picture and the people in power and what they're being promised behind closed doors, what positions they're going to have afterwards, what kind of companies abroad they're going to be controlling, or what have you. This is a network. They work in the dark, you know, and they operate. And people are like, oh, okay, the government said that. All right, okay, thank you. The Zionist lobby has extensions. These extensions are sitting in Capitol Hill, in the White House, in Westminster. They're sitting in many, many places. And they have been sitting there for a while, by the way. They spend a lot of money, and no matter how many investigative journalists reveal some of their things, you'll have some people who are completely blind. But now they're paying the price. Look, now they're paying the price. Look at the elections and what's happening. And it's good, someone said, foreign policy wasn't usually a key thing when people wanted to vote. Why not? Why not? Firstly, you have a global world today where everyone is together. It's like a small village. I mean, this term started to be used over 20 years ago, the global village, okay? Because everything is open, everything is connected, let alone the fact that physically you have people from many nations in many parts of the world. You'll go to the Gulf states, you have many Europeans, many Asians. You'll come to Europe, you have many Africans and many Asians and Europeans. The US is in... All of the countries in the world almost are based on immigration. Okay, we're all connected. So why shouldn't foreign policy matter? And why should governments get away with murder abroad, but they don't get away with murder in their own countries? If an individual physically harms someone or kills him or whatever, they get imprisoned. If someone is silent and they knew them, perverting the course of justice, prison. That's on an individual basis. So why is it acceptable on a state level and it's acceptable for you to do it abroad? So when we talk about the international law, for example, it's great to have international law. It's good to have international law, but it needs to be enforced. If international law, if international UN resolutions were enforced and they weren't only there to serve only the big powers, people who have a say or a veto or what have you, then things would have been better in many places. They would have been better, but that's not how the world is run, and that should change because you need to have law. You need to have order. The alternative is chaos, is havoc. And now these countries that call themselves democratic and based on institutions or laws or what have you are wreaking havoc across the world with your money. You're paying for it. See, that's the thing here. They're collecting the tax. That tax isn't just paying for your insurance or healthcare or whatever it is, benefits. That's funding war. You have the right. You have the right to have a say in what your money is being used for. Why? Because you're legally obliged to pay that money. So if I'm legally obliged to pay that money and I must comply, then the government must comply as well with my will. Or at least to have referendums when it comes to certain foreign policies. Or at least not blatantly support the criminal. You see, the right thing to do is obviously support the oppressed. The people who are going through oppression and suffering, obviously. But if you don't want to support them, then at least don't support the criminal. And that's what's infuriating the populations of the West. That's what's causing the rage in the streets, digitally, online, offline, everywhere. That these people are supporting a genocidal war criminal state. At least don't have a position. You know, it's bad not to have a position. Like I said, it's good and you should really morally and even from your political responsibility to support the oppressed. But if you don't want to support the oppressed and you don't want to get interfered in implication, well, at least don't support the criminal. Don't give them impunity. Lift the lid off the media support. Let things be represented as they truly are. Let things be. I mean, if you let things be, things will change. But no, they are oppressing and they are looking to implement draconian laws to stop people from talking, criticizing the protesters, labeling them, lies, propaganda, spins, government acting unlawfully to a level where this witch Braverman here, she had to resign because she was trying to politicize the police force. People trying to do their job. They're trying to make them a political force, a thought police, right? And to an extent, they have like small successes here and there. But in general, you still have a level of separation, which is important. You need to have separation between the authorities. Otherwise, you'll have full corruption. Full corruption. And that obviously has to change. That has to change. It can't go on for too long. And it won't go on for too long, so long as people are awake. When the people are awake and they're vigilant and they're active and they're vocal, yeah, things will change. Because don't forget, no change happens like that. It doesn't happen when you're sitting there and observing the news. Oh, let me observe what happens. Oh, beautiful. It doesn't happen like that. You need activity. And Marvin Vergas, thank you, said, check out Barbara Lerner's Spectra. Zio Multiculturalism for World Destruction of Edom, West, US via... Yeah, I'll have a look. Thank you for that, Marvin. Thank you so much for your super thanks. And let's see where we are. Desasaur Brewer saying, have you seen where Bahrain has abandoned the West and just signed a multi-million-dollar deal with Russia? Look, I don't think Bahrain will completely abandon the West, but what you are seeing is much more activity from Russia and China in the Middle East and in Africa. The highlight of that, the pinnacle, was the deal that China brokered between Saudi Arabia and Iran over a year ago. And China is sending messages, is signaling to the Gulf states that it can protect the region. You see, how did the US sell its presence in the region? We're protecting you. We're protecting the global trade. You're an oil-rich region. We will have our forces here to protect you from any potential harm. And they've been obviously spreading this venom about Iran and trying to cause friction between them. The neo-colonial, arrogant, racist way. What does China do? China comes and tries to decrease tensions. Look at the Chinese. Saudi Arabia and Iran, let's have a deal. Brokered by Oman, who have so many good points in how they deal with their foreign policy. By the way, Oman, they have things that they've done previously that are very good, including them helping mediate between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that was brokered by China. This is how the Chinese work: actual de-escalation and prosperity based on peace and zero tensions, trying to decrease the tensions. The US, how do they do it? US and many of the Western powers, how do they do it? Divide, cause friction, civil wars, support terrorist organizations, ISIS, and cause friction and wreak havoc to an extent, so that people can fight between them and we're deemed as the grand liberators and the enlightened ones. China doesn't operate that way. Look at how China and Russia deal with the Palestinian case. Both of them had their own efforts to try and bring the Palestinian Authority and the other resistance movements together. Russia and China. And when they did that, they said, Russia said, we're not coming here to tell you what to do, but it's our advice. Look at the approach. Where you have people like in the UK, you'll see Cameron, Hamas shouldn't play a role. And this entitled, arrogant, racist mentality, neo-colonial, imperialist mentality. Whereas the Chinese and the Russian, no, they'll speak with them as equals and tell you, we need to bring you together so we can have a de-escalation and have better relations and protect the region. You see, when they sent their ships after the genocide coalition started these attacks on Yemen, they weren't there to interfere, by the way. They were being called for help by some ships and they refused to help them. Israeli-linked ships contacted the Chinese ships to help. They did not help them, nor did they go to attack them. They only went there, obviously show presence, that's number one, but also they went there to send a message to the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia that in case the United States is engaged in an armed conflict, or if you don't see that the United States is fit and you have a problem with them, we are here. We are here to show you that we can keep the peace. We can protect the region. China can protect the region. Because technically, what's the problem? Think about Saudi Arabia, okay? Apart from the long-standing deals they have with the US and what have you, but technically, if they really have a problem with the US and having protection from the US and what have you, what's the problem in them calling China? Is China less capable than the US? Of course not. They have aircraft carriers, they have a very advanced army, and they're way more reasonable than US policymakers. China is more reasonable than US policymakers, the Chinese policymakers. And again, people take that, people misinterpret things. Like if we talk about Russia or China or any of them, by the way, they think as if it's some sort of an endorsement to everything they do, or Iran. They think it's some sort of endorsement. It's not an endorsement. We are simply observing and analyzing what people do, not to show support to this or show support to that, but to show things as they are. And in certain situations, one side needs to be supported if they're doing the right thing. That's a different story. But when you talk about them, you observe, do I agree with everything China does and implements? Haven't they done anything wrong? Neither them or the Russians or Iran, or it doesn't work like that. But from at least a foreign policy perspective, from what they do, from their actions in the Middle East and Africa, you're talking about people who have a much more assertive and productive role. And that's why we need to have a more of a multipolar world rather than a unipolar world, because that led to wars and corruption and genocides, not just one genocide. Because when you're in power, you feel like you can do everything. Hell, what the hell? I don't need to listen to anyone. You either agree or take the bullet. The CIA used to send leaders of countries, independent countries, letters with a bullet inside. Like a cartel. Either this or that. And they've done it in Latin America. Go see how military coups bringing drug cartels to power, bringing brutal dictators to power, taking down democratically elected governments, treating it as if they used to call Latin America their backyard. Same thing, countries thousands of miles away. What is that? What is that? So that's why Bahrain and other countries in Saudi Arabia, they see that they can do with, they can deal with Russia. And they might be better to deal with. I see a bit of a theological / religious debate here as someone saying Muhammad was a Trinitarian. What kind of, I don't know where you got that from, but that's totally unsubstantiated, to say the least. I mean, from an Islamic perspective, the message of Tawheed is the number one ideology and belief in Islam, as in terms of the oneness of God, which is what we believe Jesus came with, by the way. The message of Tawheed and submission to the will of God. Whereas the Meccan tribes, they used to be idol worshippers, by the way. They didn't have Trinity. Although Trinity is debated in the Christian faith, by the way. So some people in the Christian world believe in the oneness of God, and they don't interpret it in the same way that other groups do. But when it comes to the tribes of Mecca and many of the Arab tribes, they used to be idol worshippers. They used to worship Lat, Uzza, Manat, many other, by the way, many other kind of things that Islam came completely to wipe out and demolish any mediator between man and God, Allah, called in Arabic. No kind of mediator. You don't need an approval from someone to be connected with God. You have that direct communication with Him. Obviously, people try and counter that by showing that, oh no, you need to have a certain person above you to show you or guide you the way or what have you. But Islam as a religion came to have a direct communication, and monotheism, or the oneness of God, is the first and solid and undisputed belief in Islam. But to be fair, it's the first time I heard that, by the way, that I'm not sure where you got that from. Ansarullah saying, Mahmoud, what do you want to bet? Iran is planning to release the results of the investigation on October 7th and sending it to some Persian to demonize Israel then. Look, Iran planning releasing the results of the investigation October the 7th. Obviously, any investigation about the October the 7th is not going to be a full investigation. That's number one. If you talk about investigating October the 7th, Israel already had many evidence taken away. Many witnesses eliminated. So they committed the massacres, they killed their own people. Why do you have the forced hospitalization for the survivors of the Nova Festival? Why do you have 50 of them? How did they commit suicide? And why did they commit suicide? Clearly, Israel is trying to hide something. And even if Israel one day came and said, okay, we agree to investigate, it's not going to be an investigation. It's going to be a cover-up. It's going to be a cover-up. And I don't think they will have a very serious investigation anyway, by the way. They tried to delay it from the beginning under the excuse of, okay, we're in the middle of the war. We're not going to investigate anything now. But they knew that all of them are guilty. Everyone is guilty. Netanyahu, the army, the security, everyone is guilty. They know that. if not by direct complicity and enabling the event to happen. That's number one, because the worst thing is not preventing it. It's by the lack of protection when it happened. And usually the lack of protection happens when you enable something and want it to happen. And clearly they had greater plans. Obviously, the main aim was to ethnically cleanse Gaza and resettle in Gaza, capture it, in preparation to go to Sinai later on, by the way. So, I mean, this is something that I wanted to talk about, but I'll talk about it in a different live stream. And then again, why did they hand out these gas exploration contracts on the 24th of October? Just after the 20th of October, a few days. That's 2 weeks into the war, 2-3 weeks into the war. You're handing out gas exploration contracts to multinational companies to explore gas off the shores of Gaza? Is that your priority? That's not a priority. The priority is obviously to end what's happening. Stop this attack. They enabled it, they brought it on, and they didn't protect the people. Catherine Fall is saying, talk about the resist capturing more IDF in Gaza today. Yeah, I spoke about it. One of you thankfully brought it to my attention, because while this statement was released, I was in the live stream already, and I'll probably have a separate video about it as well. Okay, and that was the let's see. Okay, let me finish it with the Free Palestine comment, and we'll finish it there. The greatest threat to Zionism comes not from conflicts or wars. Zionism thrives in violence. The greatest threat to Zionism comes from peace. Zionism and peace can never coexist. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll finish it there. Again, thank you so much for everyone who was with me in this live stream. Special thanks to Marvin, to Vivette, to Francis, to AK, to Gullyberg, to Jessica, to Mariam Lahsini, and Free Palestine, your name, for your super thanks, and Troy and Armwith, thank you and welcome to the channel. And everyone else, thank you so much for joining and contributing and sending messages. I apologize if I missed some of the comments, by the way. YouTube doesn't make life easy for me. But yeah, we'll finish it there. If you haven't watched my previous video, go ahead and watch it. I might have another video later on. If not now, then tomorrow. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your weekend, and I will see you soon in the next video. A good night and peace to you, everyone.